so pushed out the thought that there was a God who was the Creator, a God who was the God of Abraham. They had so pushed out the God of Abraham out of their nation that Egypt was a dark, dark place. And America can become a dark, dark place if we continue to push God out of our lives. If we continue to push God out of our nation and say, we don't really need God. All we need is positive thinking. All we need are the spiritual things that this world has to offer. And without God, we become dark. We become very dark. The disciples, after Jesus was crucified on the cross, they sunk into what you and I would probably call depression. Imagine these men, they had left their occupations. They were fishermen, they were tax collectors. These men they had jobs and they left them. And they followed Jesus for 3 years. And then all of a sudden thinking all the time, He is the next king. We are the next government. I can be the press secretary. They have these ideas. They really thought Jesus had come to set up a kingdom. And then He died on the cross of Calvary. These men felt what the land of Egypt felt this same day. They felt despair. Hopelessness, helplessness, and even fear. Nobody knew for sure what had happened because the scene on the earth went dark. Jesus hanging on the cross and the whole earth went dark. And then what happened? The disciples decided out of fear that the best thing for them to do was to lock themselves up. After all, this man who claimed to be God is now dead. We are afraid. We're scared. When we do not realize that God is alive, we live in fear and darkness. And the disciples locked themselves up into the upper room. And after the resurrection of Jesus, even after the women had come and said, He is alive! He is alive! The disciples were still afraid. And the first thing Jesus said to them when He walked through the locked door of the upper room was He looked at His disciples and He said these words, "Be not afraid. It is I." And all of a sudden, the veil of darkness that was in that room of the disciples, all of a sudden the despair, the hopelessness, the fear was pulled back, and they could see for the very first time that this man was indeed who he claimed to be, the Son of the living God, the great I Am, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And they hung on to Him because they realized that He was the only hope of this world. And that's what Egypt needed to realize. The only hope in Egypt was not that the sun was going to come up tomorrow morning. The only hope in Egypt was not that the Nile was going to continue to make us a prosperous nation. The only hope in Egypt was that God is God indeed. And you know what that tells me? And you know what that should tell you tonight? That even though the sun may not come up tomorrow, and even though the mountains may be cast into the sea, now get a hold of this, because everything's going to be all right, because He's still God. He's still God. It matters not what our economy, the state of our economy. It matters not whether the mountains are tossed into the sea. It matters not even if the sun comes up tomorrow morning, because even in the midst of physical darkness, it is possible to have light. And that light shines on the inside of all who have placed their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. The resurrection is more than just an historical event. The resurrection brings hope to the hopeless. It brings the absence of fear to those who live in fear. It brings help to the helpless, and it brings life to the lost. Jesus said in John 3:19, "This is the condemnation. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. But everyone that doeth evil hates the light, neither does he come to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth will come to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, for they are wrought in God." James said about God in James 1:17, that He is the Father of lights. He said every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. Why does it not matter if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow? Why does it not matter if the mountain is cast into the sea? Because you and I, who are believers in Jesus Christ, those of us who are sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise, are one day going to a city where there is no need for the sun. John said in Revelation chapter 21 and verse number 23, he said about that city, he said, there's no need for the sun and there's no need for the moon. Imagine seeing a city that is lit without the sun and the moon. And John goes on to say, because the glory of God lit the city. What made the city shine? The presence of God. And what makes hell a dark place? The absence of God. What made Egypt a dark place was that everything but God was being worshipped. That made Egypt a dark place. Just like all the other plagues, this plague did not affect the children of God who lived in Egypt. The light was still shining on the children of Israel. Though we may live in dark times, and though we may live in a sin-sick world, the light can still shine in us. All is not lost. The situation is not hopeless. And we are not helpless. Because just as Jesus said, I am the light of the world, He also said to you and I who believe, you are the light of the world. Now let's take that light and let it shine in the dark world. And let's, like Moses and Aaron, go to the kings of this world and say, it must be done God's way. Second point. I want you to see tonight the importance of this sacrifice. Moses says to Pharaoh, he says, we will not go because we got to have a sacrifice. And we have to make a burnt offering to the Lord. Therefore, our livestock must go.